Good day, everyone. Today's mini lecture for session 3.2 is chapter 7 of our textbook, which is culture and values. So today we're going to be discussing how culture can actually be a strength for the company, something that a company can use to develop a competitive advantage. But we also need to stress that culture, if it's not the right culture for the company, it can actually be also a weakness. So let's go on. So here's a good definition from Schwartz and Davis. So culture is a pattern of beliefs and expectations shared by the organization's members and which produce norms that powerfully shape the behavior of individuals and groups in the organization. So if you're watching this video on your own, what you might want to do is pause for a moment this video and start writing down what you think culture is all about in your own words. And then later on, to try to see and compare your definition with this definition. And I will basically explain what this definition means. All right, so hoping that you're back after having a bit of a reflection. So culture, according to Schwartz and Davis, is all about what they believe, the employees in the company, what expectations they have for the company, and also what they expect other people within the company on how they behave. So the word norms is often mentioned. And what norms means is it actually comes from the word normal. What people believe is normal behavior within the company. What they feel is basically that's the expected behavior within the company. And that basically is the heart of the culture of a company. And it basically, once a person joins this organization and he observes and gets to feel what the culture is like, generally that influences his or her behavior, and he or she begins to imitate the way people within that organization behave. And a lot of this is unconscious. You don't necessarily, when you enter and join a company, you don't necessarily make an analysis of what the culture is. But it is something that you feel, and it is an unconscious thing that you begin to understand how people behave in that company. So here are two really good illustrations of what a culture is all about. And on the left, you'll see that cultures are basically formed from people and it has manifestations. In other words, this is how you basically observe a culture and how you can describe a culture. And there are things that are plainly visible, which is the behavior of the employees within the company. But there are some things that are not so visible. For example, their values. These are the things that they believe in, right? But this is not something that you can easily observe. But nonetheless, it is there. And many cultures have what we call symbols and artifacts. These are the things that are really clearly visible. And they basically tell you a little bit about what the company is and basically what kind of culture it has. A great example of this is McDonald's. McDonald's, of course, has certain symbols and artifacts. One such symbol and artifact is the logo of McDonald's. It's like the big M. And when people see this, it's actually, it evokes emotion. But another symbol that really gives you an idea of what McDonald's is Ronald McDonald the Clown, which is their spokesperson or he represents McDonald's and its culture. And you can say that, if you describe Ronald McDonald, he's a fun person, he's good with kids, he's funny. These are the things that sort of give you an idea on what McDonald's is all about as a company. And then basically you have what we call underlying assumptions. And these are their viewpoints, the employees' viewpoints, their worldview, and that's basically something that is hidden. And all of these are shaped by things like the stories from how the company was formed, their leaders, and we'll talk about the heroes later on, and how they communicate within the company. These are shaped, these are the things that shape the culture. And because of that culture, you have differences in personal power, in the way they do their politics. Remember that politics means how they are governed or how they are managed. And ownership and structure also is something that affects culture. So again, if you look at all these aspects of culture, some of them are very plainly visible, like the symbols and artifacts. But some of them, you sort of need to experience them. You need to observe very carefully before you can actually get a grasp on what these are. So this is why I got this symbol of an iceberg here on the right side, because an iceberg represents organizational culture very well. You've got some of that which you can see, like their buildings, the way their employees behave, but then most of it is actually invisible. Things like the underlying assumptions, their politics, their management style, their values. These are things that you can't plainly see. You need a sonar device to really figure out what the culture is all about. Okay, so that's basically the characteristics of organizational culture. Now, when we say determinants of culture, what we're saying here is, what are the things that shape culture? You know, how does culture, get formed? There are certain aspects that can be different, by the way, from one company to the other, and these are the things that basically influence the culture to become a certain shape. And the first is the environment and the industry's key success factors. Okay, so the environment means what's happening on the outside. Remember, we talked about things like our customers, the legal environment of the organization, the economics behind the industry. These are the things that sort of influence culture. And what are the things that basically you need to succeed in the industry, which is the key success factors, are things that will shape the culture. So remember, we were talking about the video streaming industry, where Netflix is operating in. And we asked ourselves, what are these key success factors? We talked about that yesterday. What are these factors that allow companies like Netflix to be successful within the industry? And I'm not talking just about Netflix, but we're also talking about its competitors like Disney, like HBO. And we said that one of the major key success factors is their content. That their content is very good quality and, of course, quite unique. You don't have the same kind of content across many players, and that's basically why people will go and pay the subscription fee, because of their unique content. So fairly recently, Disney has released the second season of The Mandalorian, which is a spin-off from their Star Wars series. And you'll see that that's it. You can only find that in Disney, and therefore this is a good incentive for people to basically purchase a subscription to Disney. So again, these are some of the key success factors. Even Netflix also has original content that you cannot find in other companies. One other key success factor. Let me just pause for a moment. So one other key success factor within the video streaming industry is that they have to have really good technology to be able to ensure that their subscribers are able to download fairly quickly their content. All right, so basically you can see that if technology is something very important in this industry, then that's the kind of influence they'll have on culture. Obviously, if you join Netflix or Disney, you need to be very comfortable with technology, and you need to be embracing new technology. Second determinant is the values desired, which is related to the key success factors and to employee reward system. So values means these are the things that we believe in the company to be important for the existence or the success of the company. And employee reward systems actually incentivize people to behave in a certain way. So if innovation is really important, then we can reward that by a bonus, for example. And innovation in that technology, the more successful we are in that innovation, then the more rewards we receive. And if you're an employee, it tells you that, yes, I need to be on the ball about technology. I need to be very innovative. So that helps shape the culture within that company. All right, so the third determinant are the heroes, the visionaries that they create the culture, the product or service innovators, or the creative marketing people. So in a company, usually the founder of that company becomes the person that people will emulate. And the values of that founder usually shape the culture and the values of the company. So a great example of this would be Ingmar Kamprad of IKEA. And yesterday we watched a video about IKEA. And the story of Ingmar Kamprad is actually really interesting. Very, I would say, quirky kind of founder. And he had certain values. And one of these values we'll talk about later is the fact that he was very frugal. Right? So he was the kind of person who didn't like to spend on needless things. And they say that he was driving a very simple car, like an old Volvo, for the longest time, even though he was a billionaire. All right. So, and then this kind of value that he had basically shaped the culture of IKEA. So later on, we'll watch more videos about IKEA, and we'll see whether that value is actually evident in these videos. So another determinant would be the rites and rituals within the organization. So these are the things that, the formal things that are done within the organization. So for example, if you have salespeople and they're often rewarded and they're given some accolades via a big program where they present rewards to their salespeople. Again, that's an indication of how focused they are on sales. While as for another organization, their focus might be on the quality of their products, and they may be rewarding their employees based on whether there's a lot of or there's less errors in their production facility and there are less defects. Another organization may be more focused on customer service, for example, how well they meet their customers, how well they take care of them. Each of these types of rituals gives you an idea on what is important to the organization, whether that it's a customer, that's their salespeople, or whether that's the production, right? So there are different focuses or philosophies. And fifth and last determinant is the culture network. So the culture network is really the communication system within the company and how people communicate within the company. And there are a lot of nuances here. I mean, you might just say, what, communication is communication. The people talk to each other, but there are companies that talk among themselves a lot more than others. There are organizations that are very formal, wherein you cannot just knock on the door of your boss and go in and have a chat with him. Uh, you need to have a set an appointment. You need to call the boss the boss. So you cannot call him by his first name, because again, very, very formal type of communication system. And when you have a communication system like that, people tend to be a little bit apprehensive in coming up and giving their suggestions, for example, to their higher management. While as there are some companies that have a more open type of communication, more informal, it's enough for you to have a chat with your boss and tell him what you think, and that's completely acceptable. Um, Emails might not be the prime source of communication. Instead, you might have a chat message or, again, verbal way of communicating. So again, each company is different. Some are more formal and some are more informal. And that's basically seen by the communication system. Okay, so this basically, the previous slide told us how cultures are shaped, but how do we actually describe the existing culture after it is shaped? Eventually, when a company starts out, after maybe 2 to 3 years, they form this culture. And we need to sort of understand what the culture is like and describe the culture in order for us to evaluate whether it is, in fact, a proper culture to have for this organization. So there are 7 aspects to this, 7 ways that we can describe a culture. The first is the way they market themselves. So their marketing orientation. In some cases, companies are more focused on their customer. So it's a very customer first direction or philosophy. But in many cases, some companies don't have their customers as their prime priority. It might be their operations. It might be the product that they're coming up with. They feel that they need to focus on the product first, and even the employees first, and then thirdly or secondly, the customers. So people might disagree with me here, but an example might be Apple. Apple, although they might say that their customer is high priority, in actuality, they feel that they can influence their customer. They feel that if they come up with good technology, they can actually get their customers to like this technology, rather than the other way around, where you're designing, you're looking first at your customer and seeing, what technology that would they want, and then you would deliver what the customers want. So slightly different philosophy for Apple, but it's highly successful, as we might remember. So Steve Jobs is basically has been quoted to say that actually the customers don't know what they want. Right? So it's actually, I believe in that. In many ways, if you ask a customer what he wants, he will basically just imitate basically what he already has. So the real, they say, marketing orientation is to try to predict what the customers will want, 5 years from now. Right? So again, differences in the way we see marketing, the way we market ourselves, would be a way that we can determine the culture. Second is the management and staff relations. So we talked about this earlier, about in many formal type of cultures, management and staff have this hierarchy, and the staff cannot just go up to their managers and slap them on the back and say, hey, call them by their first names and hey, let's have a drink, because that's very informal. And again, some companies, on the other hand, that's perfectly okay. And that's what we call a very casual, a very informal type of organization. So many technology and innovation-based companies, they sort of want to promote that very informal relationship so that communication is more open and therefore innovation can be brought out. People don't want to criticize ideas. Let these ideas come out. That way we can have more ideas to choose from. Whereas a more formal organization will tend to, you'll be very hesitant to give your idea because your boss might criticize you, and therefore you'd rather not say anything. And the third determinant is how important are goals. In some companies, goals are priority. You must achieve your goal. In many cases, they're not the priority. The priority is the employee behavior, for example, or the way we take care of our employees. Now, I'm not saying one philosophy is better than the other, but what we're saying with goals, if you're a goal-oriented company, the goal is the number one, and regardless of what will happen to the people or the employees, you want to make sure that they achieve these goals. As opposed to another way of doing it is to take care first of your employees, knowing that if you take care of them, then they will perform very well. So again, it's like that famous discussion on leadership, on whether you are a task-oriented leader or are you a people-oriented leader. So that helps shape the culture of a company. All right, so attitude, the fourth one is attitudes towards innovation and risk. Some companies push for innovation, and even if the innovation can be risky, they're willing to make a bet and place their money in that innovation. While some companies are very cautious. They will tend to sort of, okay, we might lose money if we do that, so we'll wait until everybody tries it out. If you remember the video about Netflix, Netflix was really willing to place a bet on certain innovations, even if it had not caught on yet. They went and built their business model around these technologies. Remember DVDs? Before DVDs were popular, they had come in already and placed their bet on that and made sure that they were offering these DVDs. Now that's really forward thinking and very bold in placing bets on these certain innovations, as opposed to Blockbuster, which was operating using VHS tapes and your normal storefront locations, and they didn't want to take a risk when they were offered to buy Netflix. They said, no, we don't need Netflix. So there may be, you can argue that they're kind of risk averse and they wanted to stick with what they knew. And as we know, that's disastrous for Blockbuster. All right, fifth, your attitudes towards cost reduction. We talked a little bit about this a while ago. Ingmar Kamprad, the founder of IKEA, was a known miser or a very frugal kind of person, and his values basically influenced IKEA. The sixth is commitment and loyalty to the firm. In some companies, they insist their employees are really loyal to them and they're committed to the firm. And they value that, and they actually reward loyalty. So I used to work for a company where I had a colleague, and he was there for like 25 years in the company, and he was rewarded. He got promoted because he was very loyal to the firm. But frankly, he really wasn't that good. He wasn't very outcome oriented. He was very he knew how to ride the political conditions within the company, and he knew how to stay within the boss's eyesight. And because he was with in that company for the longest time, he got rewarded for it. while as in some cases, in some other companies, it's loyalty is not that important. They're looking more at outcomes, and they're looking at more the performance of the employee, and they reward the employee based on the performance, not the amount of time that employees actually stayed in the firm. The seventh and last aspect is the reaction to new technology and change. So in some companies, they value being cautious, and when change is coming in, they would rather be conservative and not change. They would rather stick with the old and traditional. While some companies are pushing more, the change is inevitable, and you need to embrace change, and you need to learn how to work with change. So those are these seven aspects. And what we'll do now is pause the video for a moment and watch these IKEA videos. Yeah, I can get that to go. Yeah. So within Moodle, you've had these two videos. So if you're watching this on your own, I urge you to click on these and watch these videos. And then after you've watched them, try to think about whether these seven aspects, how you can describe IKEA based on these seven aspects. You know, what kind of marketing orientation do they have? How would you describe the relationship of management and staff? So that video will give you some ideas. And what you're doing here is you're actually describing the IKEA culture based on these seven aspects. Okay, we're back. This slide basically describes what we call organizational philosophies. And again, organizational philosophies are an outcome from, or a part actually, of organizational culture. And we can divide this circle here in terms of this vertical line. And on the right-hand side, you might have a company that is more internally focused, or basically looking at its people and looking at its resources. And they gain their competitive advantage perhaps from either from their existing resources, like for example, their brands, their factories, or they can derive it from their people, how talented their employees are, how innovative they are, how performance driven, how committed they are, and how productive they are. So this is one way of seeing it. On the right, you're more focused on developing competitive advantage coming from your strengths and weaknesses. We've talked about this. This is what we call resource-led strategy. But on the other hand, one other company could be more externally focused. So looking more at what's happening within the market, or looking at basically our shareholders and how satisfied our shareholders are. So when we say shareholder, we're talking about the owners of the company. Many companies are very focused on their owners, making sure that the profit is good so that their owners will get a return on investment. Maybe based on that return on investment, they offer bonuses to their employees. So, if they're a very bonus-oriented culture, the employees are looking to see, okay, how big is our profit? And therefore, if our profit is big, we know we will be rewarded with a bonus. So that's an example of being shareholder focused. Now, but we can also divide this circle based on this horizontal line, which then divides it in terms of performance or resource-based performance measures. So in other words, we reward our employees based on our resources, or we reward them based on what's happening on the outside, which is the market or the people focus. Okay, let's move on. All right. So this is really a really important slide because it shows us that culture can actually be a source of competitive advantage. And in fact, we can evaluate it based on the VRIO approach that we were talking about a few days ago. So VRIO, if you remember, is a framework where we can take every single resource that we have, including culture, or it could be the brand of our products, and ask ourselves these series of questions. First is this resource valuable? So it's like saying, is the culture a valuable commodity or valuable resource for the company? And most of the time, culture is quite valuable if it is a positive culture, right? If it has aspects of the culture which are positive. For example, if you're Netflix, and we know that technology is very important for your existence, and the culture is very technology driven and very innovative in technology, then that is absolutely very valuable. But then again, the culture may be different. It might be very stable oriented, stability oriented, or very cautious and afraid to take on risks, a very formal type of culture. Then that's not a valuable culture for a company like Netflix, right? So culture can be valuable. Culture must enable things to happen which themselves result in high sales, low cost, or high margin. Culture, again, can be, it actually is rare. It doesn't matter whether it's valuable or not, but if a culture exists, then it is usually very unique to that company. And no other company will have the exact culture of each firm, right? So, and it also is very difficult to copy. You cannot go and say, I want the culture of Apple and I want to be exactly like Apple and create a culture exactly like Apple. That's really hard to do because it's like a fingerprint, right? You cannot fix your fingerprint. It just happens. You can try to shape it. And in fact, that's what we will talk about in a few minutes. Try to shape a culture so that it's not just valuable, it's rare, it's difficult to copy, and lastly, we can really use our culture to gain sustainable competitive advantage. So the next slide, I believe, we'll talk about that. So changing culture, potential for changing culture is affected by the strength and history of the existing culture. So if you have a very, very strong culture with a really storied history, and the founder, especially if the founder is still there running the company, then changing that culture will be a little bit more difficult, especially if the founder does not want to change, right? If he's still there and he has certain bad habits, perhaps, it'll be very difficult to shape that culture, change it. The other thing is how well the culture is understood by the people within the company. If it is spread out very well and it is consistent across the employees, and if they're aware of it, then usually that's a little bit harder to change. The personality and beliefs of the strategic leader, we mentioned this earlier, and the extent of the strategic need. So in other words, if the need is strong that we need to change the culture, then culture can change because people realize that they need to change. So let's watch this culture versus strategy video, which again is found in Moodle, which really explains how culture may be shaped to our advantage. So after you watch the video, try to figure out, what are the things that you agree with within this video, and how easy or difficult is it to shape a company. Perhaps you can think of a company like Netflix or like Dyson, and see how culture can actually be shaped within these companies. Okay, so I'm hoping that you guys are back from your discussions or from your reflections, and we can go on with our lecture now. All right, so culture actually within the company can be influenced greatly by the national culture or the culture from where its employees come from. So if you're a Japanese company, obviously, most of your employees may be from Japan, and therefore the culture, the national culture of Japan, will tend to influence the organizational culture. So in Japan, most employees, regardless of where they work in, have a very product development approach, or they're very innovation driven. They want to always improve the product. Their management style is very, of course, hierarchical, and they're very focused on product quality. So that's the national culture. And if you're a Japanese company, you tend to have these characteristics. However, if you are from the US, the companies from the US, you'll be a very, very different type of culture, organizational culture. And again, this is influenced by the nationality. So very customer oriented, very influenced by quality of the product, and also technology driven. I'd say that's the third. The US companies are really pushing technology and trying to get innovations in technology. Now, if you're from Germany, it'll be a bit different. It'll be focused more on workforce skills, solving problems. I would say in terms of engineering, they're very strong, very focused on the product as well. And their management will be quite different as well versus other non-German companies. Let's go on. I think this is my last slide. So this is a quote from Konosuke Matsushita. And he is the founder of Matsushita Electric Industrial Company, the company behind Panasonic, I believe. And he said, the core of management is the art of mobilizing every ounce of intelligence in the organization and pulling together the intellectual resources of all employees in the service of the firm. Only by drawing on the combined brain power of all its employees can a firm face up to the turbulence of today's environment. So I guess what he's saying here is culture is really, really important because it helps bring together the employees, not as individuals, but as a group, so that they can perform to the success of the company. So I think that's our last slide for today. Stay tuned. I always forget that some of you might think that that's the end of the day. We might have some further discussions. So stay tuned for that.